Hey everyone, I'm HokiHoshi and welcome back to another car review, this time on the Noble M600. Noble is a brand that I've always had a big soft spot for. I originally discovered them back in Project Gotham Racing 4, if you guys remember that series, and they had both the M400 as well as I'm pretty sure the M12, but I just fell in love with the M400. I've always been a big fan of the underdogs, and Noble just exemplifies that so well. Every Noble that comes out of their small British factory is handmade, and that really shows in the styling of their cars, especially the older cars like the M12 and the M400. They just look like something some kids would design in a garage. Super aggressive, big flares, but the M600 is kind of a new turn for them. Not only does the car come in at 650 horsepower, much higher than their previous models, it also has kind of a understated and more refined visual styling to it. This car has been featured on Top Gear more than once, and every time they give it a great review, but let's see how it compares in Forza and take it for its first test drive. Alright, so we're here for a highway cruise on Fortune Island, and the first thing I'm going to do, as usual, is shut up for a second so you guys can hear the engine sound. Okay, so in my opinion, it's not a bad engine sound by any means, but it's not super great either. It doesn't sound computer generated like some of the worst sounds in Horizon 4, but it's not super unique either. Talking about the looks, I do love the car's side profile and I really like the front, but I've got to say I don't really think that the back end kind of matches the style of the whole car. It almost looks like it's a different car from this camera view than it does from the side. It's almost like they zombied the car together. I actually didn't notice that until I got in the car for the first time. I thought I was going to be super into the looks of the car until I actually drove it, but we'll talk about that more when we get back to the scoring system. So on to the most important part, how does the car drive? Now this car actually comes right out of the box at the top of S1 class at 900, and for a high-end S1 class car, yeah, it's not bad. The M600 is rear engine and rear wheel drive, which honestly I'm actually usually a bit against in most cases, but it feels really good here. It feels like an FR layout, which I'm more akin to. The car has a lot of turn-in response and manages traction pretty well for having 650 horsepower and being on Forza's sport tires. But I'd like to see it get a little more grippy while maintaining that rear-wheel drive layout, so let's head into the upgrades window and see what we can do to it. So starting with the tire compound, like I said earlier, it comes stock with a sport equivalent and we can upgrade to race. Looks like there's also the drag and rally options as well. Pretty much to be expected. There is no wheel spacing option though, which is definitely, as always, a big bummer for me. As for aero, it looks like we're going to be stuck with the pretty default options as well, just the Forza front splitter and the Forza rear wing. Now let's go to engine swaps and see what we can do there. And this is the second car where we have no engine swaps and just an all-wheel drive drivetrain. So we're really not looking at a lot of customization for this Noble here, but I will see what I can do, come back to you with a tune, and I'll be back in a second. Okay, so we are back here with the Noble M600, and you might be noticing that it looks very similar to the stock car, and that's because it is. Like I said, this was stock at 900 S1 class, and I was planning on going to S2 with it, but I've really found that this car's sweet spot is right where it is. But don't let the unchanged PI fool you. This car is working with an extra 5 horsepower at the sacrifice of a little bit more weight. However, I was able to add wider rear tires, front and rear sway bars, a race diff, as well as a few power upgrades. And this means my power is going to come on a little bit sooner. I've got more grip to the rear wheels, and most importantly, I've unlocked a lot of tuning options, and a lot of the speed comes out of the tuning. The Noble responded pretty well to my base tuning method, but I did increase the diff lock higher than I usually do, and I also softened the front suspension a little bit more than average. But with the new tune set, it's time to take it out on the track and see how it compares. So the first thing I have to say is that while I was recording this and reviewing the footage that you're seeing on screen now, I was totally into the looks of the car again, and I was even starting to like the rear a little bit. I'm starting to think that maybe it's just kind of a field of view issue. I love this car from all angles, unless I'm driving it. There's just kind of some weird thing that maybe just exaggerates the rear end. So I'm going to maybe give that one a pass when it comes to grading the car. But now onto the lap itself and how the car drove. This was definitely an improvement over the stock vehicle, which is saying something because they're both the same PI, and this really goes to show that PI is not always the most accurate indicator of a car's performance because there's so much wiggle room and adjustments that you can make. So like I said, this was an improvement over the stock car, but this was another one where I just never quite felt fully comfortable. Being rear-wheel drive and only on sport tires pushing over 650 horsepower, it was a little bit tough to manage that throttle and keep the car from spinning out. That being said, the car did have a lot of power, which felt pretty nice coming out of corners. Even though its weight was a little bit higher than average for a sports car, it didn't feel like it, both in handling and acceleration, which was really nice. The car handled beautifully, minus the kind of slippy rear end, and it accelerated really well. It was incredibly satisfying for an S1 car. That being said, in my last review where we reviewed the S1 class Bentley Continental GT Speed, I felt like that car was definitely faster than this, just for cornering reasons, and I felt a lot more comfortable in that car. I felt like I had a much better control of my driving line, whereas this car, it was a little bit tougher to wrangle, but it is kind of tough to say because I will admit this car definitely accelerated quicker. And I guess that brings us neatly into the lap times. Let's see if it really did do better or worse than that Bentley. Alright, being S1 class, we've got two cars to compare this against, the Nismo GTR Le Mans Edition and the Continental GT Speed from our last review. And the Noble M600 did it in 2:19.715. I was really curious whether or not the Noble would beat out the Continental, and it beat it by a full second, which is really impressive. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm a big fan of the underdog, and it's proven itself here in the Noble M600 being the fastest S1 car out of the three on our show. So now it's time to move on to the Hoki score and see how it stacks up there. Starting with the looks, and you know this is going to be a tough one for me, I've got to give the M600 a 7. I wanted to give it an 8 or a 9 while I looked at it from the replay screen or from a side profile, but the fact is I drive the car, and in that camera angle I felt like it was a 6 or a 5, so I'm sitting in the middle at a 7. Now on to sound. For this, I'm giving the Noble a 6. It wasn't a particularly unique sound, and it wasn't bad, but it just wasn't great. So for customization, you know this is going to get a low score. I'm giving the Noble a 2. There were no custom body kits, no engine swaps, no wheel spacing options, and there just really wasn't much to do to the car, and my tune is probably a decent indication of that. Even after modifying the car however I wanted to, I basically just kept it stock. The fun factor was a really tough one for me. I did have a lot of fun driving the car. I thought it felt great to drive, but I enjoy a car a lot more if it feels more personal to me, like I built it. And I also have more fun in a car that looks good, and from the camera angle that I play at, I didn't think it looked good. So I've got to give the Noble a 6 for fun. But now let's talk about competitive scores. Starting with drag, I'm giving the Noble a 4. It's really not that bad of a drag car, but if 5 is kind of the middle line, it's just a little bit below that. On to rally, I'm giving it a 2. This car was very clearly not designed for rally, and if you throw some rally parts on it and take it out on a dirt road, it's not going to be a great time. But let's talk race score, which is the Noble's strong point. I'm giving it an 8. Now this does match the score of my Continental GT from the last review, which was a little bit slower, but it was also a little bit easier to drive, so I'm putting them on a similar scoring point there. For drift score, I'm giving the Noble a 4. It was really well balanced and managed to kick out the rear end easily, but it couldn't handle any angle. For online, however, I'm giving the Noble a pretty high score here of a 7. I don't feel like this has much of any value for PR stunts, but in rivals times as well as online adventure, I feel like this car definitely has some merit. Now onto the right side of the screen, starting with flexibility, the Noble gets a 4. It's just really not that flexible of a car. It's great in race, and I think there's some online merit, and if you really want to drag or drift it, go ahead, but there's just not too much you can do to the car, and that's why it gets the score that it does. I had to think quite a bit about what to give this car for style points. Now, personally, again, being a fan of the underdog and having a soft spot for the brand Noble, I want to give this car a 5, but I know that a lot of people just don't think about the car too much, and if you rolled up to something like a Horizon Live event in this, I feel like most people would just kind of assume, oh, it's just another supercar. So I've got to give, for style points, a 3. So adding the total together, you're looking at a Hoki score for the Noble M600 of 53. This score comes in just under the 55.6 from the Bentley Continental, which I think is pretty fair. Now, moving forward, I'm going to be linking in the description either a Google spreadsheet or maybe eventually a website where I'll be displaying the lap time leaderboards as well as the Hoki scores for all the cars and explaining how the Hoki score works. And this will also mean that I can update the scores if you guys bring up some good points in the comments that I find are valid, like you did with my Bentley review and the rally score. So I will be updating the rally score for the Continental GT when the website or the Google Doc spreadsheet goes up. Alright everyone, that just about wraps it up for our review on the Noble M600. I've got a pretty exciting video coming out, if not the next video, it'll be 2 videos from now. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this one. And with that said, keep enjoying Horizon 4. Thanks everyone for watching.